Welcome to Newsweek and ASP's Gen Z Roundtable. My name is Juliana Pignataro. I'm the news director at Newsweek and the least important person in this conversation today. Here with me, we have Chris Evans and Mark Casson, who are going to be moderating this event as well. We also have three Gen Z leaders here with us today who I'm super excited to introduce: Jessica Carpenter, Manu Neal, and Ross Irwin, all of whom are joining us today from Bridge USA. Today we're going to be talking about gun violence, school shootings, and mental health. Quite frankly, there are a few issues in America today. Gun sales are skyrocketing. Months of lockdowns and isolation have taken an unprecedented toll on mental health, especially among young people. And just as schools are about to reopen, we're seeing mass shootings catapult angry young people back into the news cycle. And so with that, Chris, I'd like for you to start the conversation. Admittedly, that's a pretty terrifying introduction to a conversation, but it's such an important one for us to be having. Can you tell us a little bit about what role you hope ASP will play in getting America to facilitate these conversations?
Sure, just participation. I think, most of those things you just mentioned can be maybe not fixed completely, but certainly mitigated to some degree through voting, through engagement. And, I know that so much of the political landscape is daunting because not only is terminology tough to navigate, but even the process of politics, how things do change. How do we actually move the needle beyond just, voting every 4 years on a state level, really? So it's just a matter of trying to create engagement, somehow act as a catalyst for interest in the world of politics, because the amount of people who don't participate can really tip the scales. And to try and light a fire under some of them, that would be the greatest goal that we could accomplish.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I do agree with you that it all has to start with engagement. Mark, could you explain to our audience a little bit about how the partnership with Bridge USA works, and particularly why it's so important for us to hear from Gen Z?
Sure. I'll do the second part first, just to piggyback on Chris's answer. Elected officials are elected, and they're elected by constituents, which are people. And that generation, Gen Z, I think we've experienced, not just through Bridge, but through the millions of young adults who participate through ASP, have a lot to say and are yearning to be heard. And if we don't create a platform or a place for them to feel engaged, they will go away. They are more plugged in than anything I've experienced before. They have plenty of opinions and wish to be a part of the future of this country. So we need to make sure there's an avenue for that. So along those lines, Bridge. We started listening to Bridge before we started working with them. We started reaching out to Bridge to help. I can't remember if you came to us first or if we found you. But once we met Manu and Ross and the whole group, we started hearing what they were doing on college campuses and realizing this was a great direct route to people who wanted to participate in a larger way. Once we started talking to them and hearing what they had to say, we created a formal partnership and a fellowship. So what we do is we have a fellowship of college students throughout the country who in quadrants, basically, or more than quadrants, in divisions, every day go through the things and the issues that are happening. They create briefs for us. They submit them to our newsroom that we have every single day. And we use that as a base to go and talk to elected officials and use those for basic questions to make sure that the elected officials are answering things that are germane and are important to not just Bridge, but the people that they represent throughout college campuses throughout the country.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. And thanks again, Chris and Mark, for being here today. I really want to hear from Jessica, Manu, and Ross. So let's start with gun control and school safety. Over the past month, we've seen shootings are back in the news. We all know this. I don't need to explain to you all here today that Gen Z has grown up at the forefront of this. This has rapidly become the norm in American culture, and as your generation has come of age, you've been watching this firsthand. Jessica, Manu, or Ross, whoever wants to answer this question, can you describe the toll and effect that type of violence has had on an entire generation?
Well, thank you, Juliana and Newsweek, for organizing this. Chris, Mark, Kaylin, all the folks at ASP, you know how much we need you, and you know how important this partnership is to us. It means a lot to have young people actually represented at the table. And the reason why conversations like this are important is because it gives the people that are going to inherit tomorrow a seat at the table today. And that is so important, especially with conversations like this. Gun control, we've spent the last 3 years just traveling college campuses, understanding what it means to be a young person in this political moment. What you'll find is that there's a lot of disagreement on the solutions, but there's a lot of agreement on the problems that need to be solved. And that's a really unique opportunity for Gen Z to capture. When it comes to gun control, two things. One is that there's this specter of fear now. When you go to college, when you go to school classes, college classes, in the 80s and the 70s, you had nuclear war drills. Now you have active shooter drills. That shouldn't be a reality that, kindergartners, preschoolers, first, second, third graders need to be put through. It's psychologically devastating for how people are thinking about their lives. And I think the second piece of this is that when you're a young person, this epidemic of gun violence is a uniquely Gen Z problem. Just yesterday night, we had a mass shooting in Orange County. In the past, I think, week or so, we've had a mass shooting almost every other day. That's a problem. And I think that demonstrates that young people have to step up and have to elevate their voices, because this is devastating the way that students are thinking about their daily lives. And that's where we come in. And our job is to facilitate these tough conversations so that we can get somewhere.
Manu, you mentioned this political moment, and I want to talk about that a little bit. As the gun violence crisis in this country proliferates, the politics of the moment are increasingly polarized, with positions so entrenched and emotions running so high around these issues. How can America begin to have productive conversations?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. There are a lot of tough conversations, and so we've developed at Bridge some things that you should think about when jumping into any tough conversation, and it really breaks down into two things, right? First is, how are you going to approach that conversation? What's the mindset you bring into it, right? And the second is how you actually have that conversation, right? So when you're about to jump into a conversation like this, there are a few things you have to recognize, right? One is, we're definitely not right about everything, and we might be wrong about a lot. And so bringing that sense of humility is of the utmost importance. We also have to be willing to learn, not just to win the conversation. So many people just want to win, but if you approach the conversation as an opportunity to learn, then you can actually get some good things out of it, right? And finally, dialogue will not solve problems, right? But it can be a good start. And this country has lost the ability to talk to one another. And so we have to be able to have that conversation. We know that, that won't change the policy, but that's a good starting point, right? So have the courage to have that conversation. Then when you're in the discussion, right, there are a few things you got to do. And we've got some core discussion norms at Bridge that we follow that are good ways to keep the conversation civil, productive, and empathetic, right? First is just a basic rule of life. Don't interrupt people, let people speak, let people finish. The second is, you have to listen rather than listening to respond or to critique, but really hear someone out. Thirdly, you've got to critique the perspective, not the person. So ad hominems, personal attacks, those don't get you anywhere. Talk about what's being said instead of who's saying it. And finally, we're all individuals. And so you can't expect someone to speak for a group that they belong to and say, oh, why do all Republicans believe this? Why do all Democrats believe this? But treat that person as an individual. You're going to find a lot of nuance there, and you'll be able to have a productive conversation.
Juliana, can I amend my previous answer to why we need to listen to the youth and talk to Bridge to just using Ross as an example and what he just said?
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think that the emphasis on nuance and conversations, we've lost that. And I think it's such an important starting point, to Chris's point, to get people engaged in these conversations. You both kind of touched on something that I really want to talk about, which is that not everyone agrees, and not everyone knows what the solution is. And I think that we all understand that we have to talk about these things. There is no disagreement there. What people do disagree upon is what exactly we need to do. And I'm curious, where do the fault lines lie among Gen Z? Where are there agreements, but perhaps more importantly, where do those disagreements lie?
I think it's important that we embrace the complexity of the issue and look at both sides of the argument. there's a difference in mindset underlying this debate. And on one side, we have the argument of the Second Amendment, where you have the right to protect yourself. And this side also talks about the individual using the gun instead of the gun itself. The other side kind of focuses more on the gun and the impact that that has on the community and who it puts in danger. The argument also talks about mental well-being. And I think that one side also kind of questions, why should somebody else's mental well-being impact the way that you perceive my personal? So the debate then becomes kind of like a give and take situation between safety versus freedom. And I think that both are really strong arguments. There's also the point of mental health that we're talking about, where the fact is that 61% of gun-related incidents and deaths in 2019 was from suicide. And acknowledging this, I think, is also important when we talk about gun control. The similarities between both sides is each side wants a certain kind of protection, right? And I think they also do take mental health into consideration. And I think it's safe to say that all of us agree that we want to have fulfilling, long, good, happy lives. And looking at statistics, 57% of voters actually think that there should be stricter gun laws, which means that more than half of the population does agree on the problem. And that's a really good place to start this conversation. The next step, I think, would be finding solutions that make sense and then also seeing where improvement.
Jessica, you talked about mental health, and I want to go back to that. Mental health in the conversation that we're having today, these issues are inextricable. We can't talk about one without talking about the other. And so I want to broaden the conversation and talk a bit about that. And Mark, I'll turn it over to you here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've heard a lot from Bridge USA and from Gen Zers about mental health and how strongly they feel. And quite frankly, it's impressive because that's been stigmatized over the years. And this generation seems to be requesting a different path. And, there's cultural pressures. The pandemic has also helped to normalize the conversation. So my question is both to anyone in the group, Manu, Jessica, Ross, how are young people approaching mental health differently than what other people have done in different generations?
Yeah, and I think Jess hit it on the head right before this question, Mark. I think Jess outlined sort of the mental health component and the difference between mental health and gun control and how those are not actually that separate in terms of the substance of the issues, but we've created that divide. When it comes to young people, there's two facts to think about. One is that the CDC has identified gun violence and suicide as the second leading cause of death. And the second fact is that there's a study performed by a psychologist named Robert Leahy, where he describes that the average mental health condition of a Gen Z member is the same as the average mental health condition of someone in the 50s in a mental health ward. That's huge. You think about the level of anxiety, you think about the level of imposter syndrome that occurs because of social media. Those are real problems we have to contend with. The other thing is the rise in anxiety caused by social media, caused by technology, the fact that we all are dependent on these different tools for how we think about issues. And Jess can get a little bit more into how our generation is approaching the differences as compared to older generations about the issue of mental health. And side note is there's a lot of progress there, actually. Because this problem is so pervasive, our generation is uniquely equipped to address the problem. But we have to recognize and exercise some strategic empathy. This is the reality. Young people are under a lot of mental health pressure, so let's do something about it.
Manu, before we get to, I'm sure Mark has more questions, but before we get to those, I want to touch on something that you just said. You talked about social media. It's so important to this discussion. Social media has been vilified, rightfully so, for contributing to a lot of these issues that we're talking about. Do you think there's a positive in there that has helped your generation become, more open with each other, more empathetic, maybe as a result?
Well, I know that Jess is far more qualified than I am to answer this question, given that she's the marketing director of Bridge USA. The only thing that I would add from my sort of Luddite, technologically backwards perspective, even though I'm a young person, is it's two sides of the same coin. The positive is that never in human history have people been so connected. That's huge. The reason why our civilization, when you track the progress of humanity, the ability to communicate is what allowed us to actually build civilization, allowed us to build progress. So we have to have some perspective. Now, the flip side of that situation is that I don't think we still know how to use it as a tool. Right now, social media controls our lives. We don't control social media. And I think our generation is uniquely equipped to solve that problem because my brother, for example, Juliana, is growing up with an iPad, right? He's in fifth grade right now. He lives and breathes technology, and he's figured out, and his friends have figured out, they don't use Facebook, social media for news. They just use it to connect with each other for the purpose of its original conception. And so I think that's the difference in our generations, is that we're starting to figure out how to actually utilize social media to better our lives instead of using and letting the destruction of social media actually interrupt the way we run our lives. And I think that distinction is important.
Really well said. Man,
Yeah.
this is so encouraging.
Yeah. But could I actually, Juliana, Jessica, I would like to know because, Chris and I basically started ASP with a couple of people and this idea and just, we used what we had to knock on doors. And quite frankly, from a very naive perspective, dealt with the marketing and the social media of it later. I would even say we didn't think about it. We wanted a website, which apparently you all don't go to these things. You just have
Those aren't a thing anymore, Mark. Those aren't a thing.
Yeah. So Jessica, I am curious from your perspective as where that bridge, where that line is between social media marketing and mental manipulation.
Yeah. I guess I can also speak to this because I'm a journalism major. So you kind of have to figure out how to be able to resonate with your audience, which I find really helpful when I am doing marketing. Going back to what motivates people, a lot of young people do agree that they want to see better democracy. They want to see more action in our government. And that's kind of the underlying message in a lot of our marketing, for example, is saying that, hey, these things are possible. Look at what we're doing here and look at how many chapters we have here. And that's really encouraging to people. As far as social media goes, I think that's brought a new aspect to seeing that we're all we go through the same things. We experience a lot of similar things. I know a lot of people I feel like are very open to discussing mental health and maybe anxiety or ADHD, on Twitter or on Instagram and sharing facts about it that one, educate people, but then two, also kind of say oh, hey, it's okay to have these. Many people do. And so social media definitely can help there. The negative side is I think it kind of also aids us in our echo chambers, which is something that needs to be worked on. But I think that it does help us to be connected really with each other.
So how is this to all three of you young geniuses? How is Bridge USA specifically trying to encourage young people to get involved? Because that's the hardest thing, right? You can offer the information, you can lead a horse to water, you can't get it to drink. How are you actually getting young people to choose engagement?
Ross, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So there are kind of different things that you have to do. One is you have to actually convince people that it's worth it, right? And we see this problem on campuses a lot. You have the extremes that are very politically active, and then you have a broad swath of people that have given up. They've said, politics is too toxic. We can't do this, right? So I'm just not going to engage. And so what we do a lot is convincing people that they actually can engage in a productive way, that they're safe to do that, and they can learn a lot out of it. But I mean, fundamentally, we don't really have a choice. If you're a young person out there today and you look at our politics and you say, wow, that's nasty, and I don't want to get involved in that, you have to realize that if we don't do it, no one else will. So we tell them, you have to get engaged because there's really no other choice. And also I would say, we have to embrace our differences. And that's something that we love to talk about at Bridge is that difference is really the strength of America. And people may think that it divides us, but in reality, that's where the richness of America truly is. And so embracing that difference and then showing young people it's all right. Because once you get someone in a Bridge USA discussion, they might be hesitant at first. They're like, oh, are there going to be, these people there? Are they going to attack me for this? And then we sit them down you have a productive conversation, and the light bulb goes off. And they say, oh, I could have been doing this at home. I could have been doing this in the workplace with my roommates, right? And so I think really showing people that you can do it and have them taking that first step is kind of like, you know, the starting point of how to get people actually involved in politics in a productive way into the future.
And Chris, could I just say one thing on what just Ross said? Ross, every day he talks with like 15 students. He's the one that's actually managing all of our chapters and talking to these young people. And I think he's slightly underselling what he actually does, which is he's actually helping young people see a different path. That's huge. And people undermine and denigrate the possibility and the moment and opportunity that happens when you actually talk to someone one-on-one. And that's very powerful. And we can't forget that the fundamental unit of democracy are people, us. We move things forward. We got to talk to people in a better way, in a productive way, an empathetic way. So I just want to give a shout out to Ross for all that he's doing and actually managing and helping these young people get a new way forward.
Let me give a shout out to all three of you. These answers are great. My goodness. Good stuff, team.
Absolutely. Wow. I totally agree. We've talked a lot during this conversation about you and your generation. And of course, that's incredibly important. But we have to acknowledge here that that's just half the picture. And the other half is our leadership in our country. And so this is a question for any of you. What do you think our political leaders could do better to foster a more productive political climate in this country?
I think that we constantly talk about working across the aisle, but nowadays it seems to be under some kind of circumstance. We're always waiting for the other side to compromise or to act first when it comes to their stances or their policy. And I think the idea of party politics has become the new norm and really kind of aids in this as well. Many politicians often think that they need to speak to their loudest base, when in reality, our politicians need to take up the position that they're leaders and take ownership of the fact that working together is in their hands. Have a little humility. Acknowledge that your party might not have all the right answers, and there's always improvement. I think it's important to know that working together is necessary for the success of our democracy.
Let me ask you this along those lines, and this could be anything we've talked about, from mental health, school safety, to gun reform. You guys, as you said, talk to your constituents, your peers, or slightly younger than you every day. Specifically, what are the main issues that you would ask to see in terms of reforms of our leaders?
I would say that, and by the way, that pause demonstrates how complex the issue is. And I think that demonstrates, and we have to sit with that. It's okay. We don't have direct and easy answers. And I think each of us would actually say something nuanced and different. And I think we should allow that, because that is exactly what moves progress and arguments forward. I know that Ross, Jess, and I have been thinking a lot about school safety, gun control, and the bifurcation in these issues. And what you'll find, Mark, is that, as Jess said earlier, conservatives often say, and people that sometimes ascribe to conservatism will sometimes say that guns aren't killing people, people are killing people. And on the left, you'll have a lot of folks say that actually no, it's that we need to make sure that it's a lot easier to have guns. The fact that oftentimes a lot of people will say on this side is that there's 3 times as many guns as there are people in this country. And so recognizing those two facts, I think the important part of this is that we all want to live. You know, it doesn't matter which party you're on, we all want to live. And so the importance here is that there's a lot of easy mental health measures that we can pass. You know, things focusing on lowering the cost of anxiety drugs, making it easy for students to actually have access to mental health counselors, thinking about a lot of the specific school shootings and actually being able to study them. That's the other fact. Until 2 years ago, the CDC couldn't actually study gun violence. How can you solve a problem without studying it? That's like so we learned in like 5th grade is you can't have an hypothesis without testing it. So that's what I would say. I don't know, Jess or Ross, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was well said.
Yeah. Well, I think this next question is kind of piggybacking on that. If you could tell our nation's leaders one thing, would it be about an individual policy? Would it be advice on how to address disagreements? If you could be face to face with the people who run the country, what would you say?
I'll go first on this one because I think I might have a bit of a controversial stance. I would say that I think you can do better for your constituents. And I say that because I believe that it's possible. There's such a quick turnaround right now, or just with term limits, and a large emphasis on being reelected, especially in our House of Representatives, where most of their term for 2 years is kind of focusing on campaigning and being reelected, that the only real work that they do in policy is for about, I think, 6 months. And when the focus on being reelected is so important, it's easy to try to get that good one liner in the media or have a really strong social media presence. But our communities don't receive as much attention and don't see much follow up on the initiatives that were talked about during the campaigning or on that were previously promised. There's a lot of forces trying to create division, and it's our political leaders' jobs to navigate through that polarization and to lead. And I think it's important for our public officials to show us that engaging in politics isn't hopeless and that finding solutions is still a top.
Very well said.
I would just say, going off of what Jeff said on a personal side, is asking the question, why did you run in the first place? What's your purpose? Like, why are you doing this? Just getting an answer to that question, because if we don't actually know why we're doing what we're doing, what's the point, right? What is the why behind that? Right now, members of Congress, as Jeff said earlier, members of Congress, being a U.S. senator, being a U.S. congresswoman or congressman, that's a huge responsibility. We take it as just another job in society. It's not another job. It's also very novel in the scope of human history. And so we're counting on you. And we need you to be better. And we need to know why you're in this job. And I think asking that question will help them be better themselves, because we believe in them and we need them.
Only thing I think that I would add to this is, you are our leaders, and we have to focus on healing this divide. Right? We can stay in the same bad incentive structures, in the same polarization, as long as we want. But if you want to do something about it, if you want to heal our nation, you have to be able to reach across the aisle in Congress, but you also have to be able to talk to the constituents that you didn't vote for you, right? And realize that you represent all of your constituents and all of your community. And so I would really just say to all our leaders out there, the division that we have in America is unsustainable, if not straight up impending doom. It's in our classrooms, it's in religion, it's within race and gender. And so, we can sit around and pretend like our hands are tied, or we can go out and start healing those divisions. And that's what I'd like to see from our leaders.
Well said. Please, all three of you run. Please, all three of you run. I think there is it's really an undervalued commodity right now. This energy, the feeling of someone whose main goal is to kind of solve problems and not just win an argument. I think people are starved for it. And there is such a backward incentive to how we do anyway. I know we're getting a little off script. No, I'm going to tell you here, because this is the problem. It's such a backward system. I mean, why aren't there term limits? Anyway, sorry.
100%. And I got to say, when we found Bridge or Bridge found us, when I started to look into these young adults and realize they literally just graduated schools that would normally, their parents, I'm sure, requested that they get actual jobs, that paid them a bunch of money from those pretty big educations that were paid for or loaned for, whatever. And they chose to double and triple down into this. Continually reinvigorated us. It holds.
Don't get discouraged, because the why is so big too. When Mark and I went to DC, I know we're getting a little off script. One of the main things we asked everybody is the why, because I think it's so easy to show up in DC idealistic, and very quickly you learn the rhythms and the racket and the fact that, like you said, the second you're in office, you're thinking about re-election.
Look, guys, as we wrap up this conversation, we talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, and it can be tough. And we talked a lot about, hopelessness and frustrations and all of those things. And I want to end on the note, Ross, that you struck, which is healing. And I'd like to hear from all three of you. I want to know what you're hopeful that you will see in your lifetime, and not just what you're hopeful about, but what are you optimistic that you'll see? Because I think our nation is so bogged down in the bad and the disappointing and the we can't get anywhere like this. And I think it would be great to hear from your generation, what you really think you will see on a positive note.
Well, I'm going to be honest, Juliana. When I got into this work, I was a pretty pessimistic person, and I was not very hopeful about the future of America or the world. But what gives me hope and what I'm hoping to see every day, I talk to students doing this work, engaged in this, working on the ground, on their campuses, tirelessly, day after day, to create these conversations, to heal our divides, right? And to have tough conversations that a lot of other people in the nation won't face. And what I hope to see, and what I truly believe we will see, is this next generation taking a hold of our future and what will happen to us right now, and beginning to work on these issues and find solutions. And I truly think that Gen Z is not only capable, but really desires and needs to do this. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Jess, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ross. I think something that's kind of exciting is working with Gen Z and then millennials in general is I think we're going to come out with a different mindset from our predecessors, and that we're looking at understanding the underlying values that help to drive the parties or individual policy choices. So I think in the long run, what I hope to see is more long-term solutions instead of like just band-aid solutions that are not solved between different leaders. And I think that with this new mindset, that is possible, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm a little emotional right now because the reason why I'm emotional is because we've given everything we've got to this work, and I remember when Mark had asked us to actually come visit him, and we're just doing this work. That's it. There's nothing else to it. And the reason why we're doing it is, and it means so much to be in this position after 4 years of grinding, working, and it's not about us. It's about the students that we represent, and this is a huge win for them. And so what I want to see is for all those young people that we talk to on a daily basis to get involved and to use this platform as an inspiration for doing something good. I don't have any policy prescriptions. I don't have any demands. The only aspiration I have is just for every young person that's thinking about the fact that this is not right or it's just not working for them, is that they've got to do something about it. We've got to find our purpose, and we have to get engaged, have some perspective. We have the privilege to complain about problems that half the world doesn't even have the ability to complain about. That's huge. And so let's just maintain that perspective and push forward.
Absolutely. And, the work that you guys are doing, inspires hope. I think I can speak for all of us when I say that. As we wrap up our conversation, any final words, Chris and Mark, about ASP or the discussion we had today?
This discussion was fantastic. It's so encouraging hearing voices from the younger generation. Well, like you said, Ross, not only are you guys capable of this, you guys are built for this. And I think you have a very fresh perspective on so many issues. You are tip of the spear in so many ways. And you can identify more readily than an older generation what simply is untenable, what's toxic. And to kind of break that chain requires a level of maturity and courage, vulnerability, a willingness that I think some of the more older ossified folks have a harder time accessing. So thank you guys for doing what you do. Keep it up. We need you.
I'll say the same. When we first met, I think I said to Chris, I'm waiting to see the crack. This can't be real. You guys can't be this committed. And when we finally said, like, wow,
keep delivering. They keep knocking them out of the park.
And so thank you. You keep us honest. And I also want to say, Juliana, thank you so much for leading this conversation. We really just appreciate Newsweek for supporting this whole month of examination through the lens of Bridge and of Gen Z to make sure that we are giving them the shot that they ask for to have their voice be instilled into the next set of conversations. So we're just happy to be here.
Yeah, Manu, how about you? Any final words?
I would just say that I'm extraordinarily grateful. I have to say that none of us have been involved in school shootings. None of us have actually dealt with the trials of mental health. So the grain of salt that I want to give to this conversation is that we don't necessarily have the perspective that someone watching this is saying, why do these folks get to speak about it? But what I will say is that we're working hard to make sure that we reach that person that is annoyed that we're here and they want to be here. This is a platform for every young person to think about a new way to get involved. If you want kindness in our politics, you want humility, and you want real progress, there's a new way. And we're going and hitching our wagon to Bridge USA. You can do whatever it is that you want, but we need you to get out there and get involved. There's nothing more important we can be doing. It is so easy to give into the pessimism. And I want to give a huge, huge thank you to ASP, to Newsweek. Every week I'm like, when is this going to end? But either way, y'all have given us a tremendous platform, and it's so important. Every young person out there right now, think about what is it that you want to do, and we're going to help you get there. There's nothing more important we can be doing at this moment. So thank you all. And thank you, Ross. Thank you, Jess. These are my best friends. We did everything together. Jess came on as a senior. This is huge for us, and we're going to keep doing it.
Thank you, Manu. And I want to thank you all so much for being here today. Chris, Mark, Jessica, Manu, Ross. This was a wonderfully productive and illuminating conversation, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next. You're so inspiring, and the work that you're doing is just really, really heartening. On behalf of Newsweek and ASP, I want to thank our audience so much for joining us. We really hope you'll stay engaged in conversations like these in the future.
Thanks, Juliana.
Great work.
Thank you.
Great stuff, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. God, you guys are geniuses. Don't stop. Keep doing it. Stay engaged. And, man, we're lucky to know all three of you. Thank you so much. And, Julianne, great job. You nailed it. Excellent work.
Thank you, guys. Incredible conversation. Great meeting all of you.